Standing in the shadows of the ballroom, I gripped the envelope that would destroy two prominent families in less than 20 minutes. For 365 days, I had remained silent while my ex-husband and best friend built their empire on lies. They smiled, thinking I was just a broken guest, but they had no idea that I was not here to toast their union. I was here to burn it down. My name is Lucille Hartman. At 32 years old, I had built a career on finding patterns where others saw only chaos as a senior data analyst for the Westfield Meridian Group. My job was to look at spreadsheets and find the anomalies, the tiny discrepancies that hinted at a larger rot. Tonight, however, I was not analyzing market trends or fiscal projections. I was analyzing the structural integrity of a lie that had cost me my marriage, my dignity, and nearly my sanity. The grand ballroom was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, a display of wealth so aggressive it felt like a physical assault. It was the kind of opulence that screamed old money to anyone within a 5-mile radius. I stood near the entrance, a ghost in a simple black dress amidst a sea of champagne silk and tuxedo black. To the 300 guests sipping vintage wine, I was likely a curiosity, an anomaly in their perfectly curated algorithm of high society. I could feel the weight of their gazes sliding over me. It was a physical sensation, like the brush of cold velvet against my skin. They whispered behind manicured hands, wondering why the ex-wife would dare to show her face at the wedding of the century. Most women in my position would be at home with a bottle of wine and a broken heart. They expected a scene of hysteria. They expected tears. They did not understand that I had run out of tears exactly 365 days ago. My pulse was steady. My hands were dry. The calm that settled over me was not the peace of acceptance. It was the icy resolve of an executioner. I had spent a year in the dark so I could bring the light to this specific moment. I watched a waiter approach me, his tray trembling slightly as he noticed the tension radiating off me. "Champagne, miss," he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked at the bubbling gold liquid and shook my head. "No, I need to keep a clear head. The show is about to start." At the center of the room stood Miranda Cole. She was radiant, laughing with her head thrown back, exposing her long, elegant neck. She wore a custom gown that likely cost $50,000, encrusted with pearls that caught the light like tiny, mocking eyes. For a decade, she had been the sister I never had. She held my hand when my mother died. She toasted at my wedding. Now, she was marrying the man she had sworn to help me keep. Beside her was Grayson Hale, my husband. Or rather, the man who used to be my husband before he decided that my pedigree was insufficient for his political ambitions. He looked handsome in his bespoke suit, playing the part of the devoted groom perfectly. He had that charm that used to make my knees weak, the same charm he used to gaslight me into believing I was crazy for suspecting them. They thought they had won. They thought their money and their influence had erased me. They believed that time had buried their sins. But data never lies, and neither does a woman who has lost everything. My fingers tightened around the thick, cream-colored envelope in my clutch. It contained 20 pages of forensic accounting, printed emails, and bank statements that I had painstakingly assembled. It was heavy, not in weight, but in consequence. Inside that paper casing sat the destruction of the Hale legacy and the end of Miranda's social climbing. The music swelled, signaling the beginning of the speeches. The crowd turned their attention to the head table, their faces masks of polite adoration. I watched Grayson raise his glass, his smile tight, his eyes scanning the room but missing me entirely. He did not know that the ground beneath his feet was about to open up. I took a step forward, emerging from the shadows of the marble pillar. The time for silence was over. Before the diamonds and the deceit, there was just a 2-bedroom apartment on 4th Street and a futon that smelled of dust and cheap fabric softener. 5 years ago, Grayson Hale was not the heir to a financial dynasty. He was just the man who burned our toast on Sunday mornings and laughed until he hiccuped. We lived on $40,000 a year, and we were obscenely happy. I remember lying on his chest one rainy Tuesday, listening to his heartbeat, believing that this rhythm was the only soundtrack I would ever need. Then Verena Hale stepped out of her ivory tower and decided to reclaim her son. Verena was a woman carved from granite and wrapped in silk. She did not have the warmth of a mother. She had the calculating gaze of an investment banker assessing a high-risk asset. From the moment we met, she treated me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a clerical error she intended to correct. She never raised her voice. She did not have to. Her disdain was in the way she glanced at my off-the-rack shoes, or how she would redecorate a room in our home without asking, erasing my presence with expensive beige furniture. "Lucille, dear," she told me once during a brunch that cost more than my first car, "you really must stop trying so hard to fit in. It makes the difference in our breeding so much more apparent." I watched as her influence seeped into Grayson like a slow-acting poison. At first, he defended me, but as Verena dangled promotions, trust funds, and access to the elite circles he secretly craved, my husband began to change. The man who used to despise his family's pretension now corrected my grammar at dinner parties. He stopped holding my hand in public. He started working late. Seduced by the power Verena fed him, Verena was tactical. She knew she could not force a divorce without looking like the villain, so she created an environment where I would suffocate. She stopped inviting me to family gatherings, claiming they were for immediate family business. Yet I would later see photos of Miranda Cole seated right next to Grayson. Miranda, my confidant. The woman I cried to when Grayson started coming home at 2 a.m, smelling of expensive scotch and cold indifference. I began to notice things that made my stomach turn. A glance between them that lingered a second too long. A text message on his phone at midnight that he dismissed too quickly. "You are being paranoid, Lucille," Grayson said one night when I confronted him, his voice dripping with a condescension he had learned from his mother. "Miranda is your best friend. She is helping me plan a surprise for you. God, you are so exhausting sometimes." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the knot in my gut was just insecurity, just the side effect of Verena making me feel small. Miranda played her part perfectly, holding my hand and telling me I needed to relax, all while she was slowly taking my place. The breaking point came 3 months before the end. We were at a charity gala hosted by the Hale Family Foundation. I stood by Grayson's side, wearing a dress I had saved for months to buy, feeling proud. Verena tapped her glass for a toast. The room went silent. She looked around the room, her eyes landing on Miranda, then sliding dismissively over me. "To the future of the Hale legacy," Verena announced, her voice projecting to the back of the hall. "We invest only in what yields the highest returns. One must always know when to cut a liability, no matter how sentimental one might feel about it." The room chuckled politely, but I felt the blood drain from my face. Everyone knew she was not talking about stocks. She was talking about me. I looked at Grayson, waiting for him to squeeze my hand, to show some sign of loyalty. Instead, he took a sip of his wine and looked away, leaving me standing alone in a room full of people, realizing for the first time that I was no longer his wife. I was a bad investment he was preparing to liquidate. It started with a synchronization error on our shared cloud account. As a data analyst, I knew that glitches were rarely just glitches. They were usually symptoms of a system trying to reconcile two contradictory realities. On a Tuesday night, while Grayson was allegedly at a shareholder meeting that ran until 2 a.m, his iPad on the nightstand lit up. It was not a text, but a calendar reminder he had forgotten to privatize anniversary dinner, the Pierre Hotel. My heart hammered against my ribs. Our anniversary was 4 months away. I dug deeper. I became a forensic auditor of my own marriage. I cross-referenced his business trips with Miranda's social media check-ins. When he was in Chicago for a conference, she was posting photos of the bean. When he had a late strategy session, her fitness tracker showed zero activity for 3 hours. The patterns were undeniable. The most damning piece of evidence, however, was a photo Miranda sent to our group chat. It was a picture of her holding a martini glass with the caption "Cheers to New Beginnings." She thought she was careful, but she missed the reflection in the polished brass rail behind her. It was distorted, but the silhouette of the man taking the photo wore a distinctive Patek Philippe watch, the same watch I had gifted Grayson for his 30th birthday. When I confronted him that evening, I expected denial. I did not expect him to look at me with pity. "Lucille." "Honey," he said, his voice dropping to that smooth, patronizing register he reserved for children and subordinates. "You have been under so much stress lately. A watch. You are accusing me of adultery because of a blurry reflection in a bar. I think you need to see a therapist. This jealousy is becoming dangerous." I felt the ground shift. "It is your watch, Grayson. I know the strap. I bought it. It is a popular model," he snapped, slamming his hand on the marble counter. "Stop looking for problems where there are none. You are ruining us with this insecurity. It is suffocating." I went to Miranda the next day, desperate for validation. She poured me tea in her sunlit living room, her face a mask of concern. I showed her the timestamp. I showed her the calendar entry. She placed a hand on my knee and sighed. "Oh, Lucille, Grayson told me you were spiraling. He loves you so much, but you are pushing him away." That dinner. It was probably for a client. You know how private he has to be. Do not throw away a good marriage because you are feeling inadequate compared to his family. She twisted the knife so gently I almost thanked her for it. Verena Hale completed the encirclement. At Sunday dinner, the atmosphere was frigid. I sat at the far end of the table while Verena placed Miranda to her right, engaging her in a spirited discussion about charity galas and summering in the Hamptons. "It is so refreshing to talk to someone who understands the nuances of our world," Verena said, not even glancing at me. "Miranda, you would make such a splendid matriarch one day. Some women simply lack the spine for it. They were erasing me. I was the ghost at my own table. They gaslighted me until I questioned my own memory. I spent nights lying awake, wondering if I truly was the toxic one, if I was the broken variable in their perfect equation. But then, the analyst in me took over. Emotions are volatile data, but numbers do not lie. I stopped fighting. I stopped crying. I started recording. I bought a hidden voice recorder and stitched it into the lining of Grayson's favorite briefcase. I installed a keystroke logger on the home computer he thought was secure. I began to download his financial statements, noticing transfers of $10,000, $15,000, labeled vaguely as consulting fees, all flowing into an account managed by Miranda's brother. The marriage was no longer a partnership, it was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. One morning in late October, after gathering 3 terabytes of incriminating data, I realized I could not stay in that house a moment longer without screaming. I needed distance to weaponize what I had found. I waited until Grayson left for the office and Verena went to her club. I packed a single duffel bag. I took no jewelry, no clothes he had bought me, and none of the cash from our joint account. I drove to the train station and bought a ticket to a small town 3 states away using cash I had saved from my own paycheck. I threw my SIM card into a trash can on the platform. To the world, and to the Hales, Lucille Hartman had simply evaporated. They probably thought I had gone to a mental institution or retreated in shame. They had no idea I was just retreating to high ground to set up the artillery. For 3 months, I ceased to exist. I rented a small, drafty cabin in the darker corners of Maine, where the silence was so heavy it felt like a blanket. I cut my hair short, dyed it a sharp, unrecognizable black, and lived under the name Jane. The isolation was not a punishment. It was a detox. Stripped of Verina's suffocating judgment and Grayson's pathetic lies, my mind sharpened. The fog of gaslighting lifted, revealing the cold, hard geometry of the truth. I was no longer the weeping wife. I was the analyst, and I had a data set that needed to be resolved. I reached out to Elias, an old friend from university who now worked in forensic accounting for the federal government. He owed me a favor from a time I had caught a coding error that would have cost him his career. We met in a diner 30 miles from my cabin, speaking in low tones over lukewarm coffee. "You know what you are asking for is illegal." "Lucille," Elias whispered, tapping his fingers nervously on the Formica table. "If the Hale Group has the kind of security I think they do, they will track us. They are not looking for me." "Elias," I replied, staring into my black coffee. "They think I am broken. They think I am a tragedy. They have no idea I kept the administrative access codes Grayson used on his home laptop. We spent the next 6 weeks building the case. It was not just about the affair. Adultery is painful, but it is not a crime. What I found in the encrypted subfolders of the Hale Group's server was far worse. It was theft, massive, systemic, and arrogant. Verena Hale was not just a savvy businesswoman, she was a predator. I traced transfers of $200,000, then $500,000, moving from the family's charitable foundation, the one meant to build libraries for underprivileged children, into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. The paper trail was complex, layered under legitimate-sounding consulting fees and vendor payments. But the pattern was undeniable. And there, at the bottom of every fraudulent authorization, was the digital signature of Grayson Hale. He signed off on everything, Elias said one evening, his face pale in the glow of his laptop screen. "Lucille, look at the dates. He started draining the pension fund the same week he bought that villa in Tuscany. They are robbing their own investors to fund their lifestyle." I felt a cold thrill run down my spine. It was the feeling of a hunter finally spotting the prey through the scope. He thinks he is protected. Verena told him he is untouchable. "If we take this to the SEC now, they will lawyer up," Elias warned, rubbing his temples. "They will claim it was a clerical error. They will blame a mid-level accountant. They will spin it. Lucille, you know how they operate." He was right. If I struck now, I would wound them, but I would not kill the beast. Verena had judges on her speed dial and senators at her dinner table. She would turn herself into the victim. I needed a moment where they could not spin the narrative. I needed a moment of total, public exposure where their arrogance would be their cage. I waited. I watched from afar as their social media accounts painted a picture of blissful triumph. Miranda posted photos of wedding tastings and dress fittings, captioning them with nauseating quotes about true love winning in the end. They were so confident, so drunk on their own perceived invincibility. Then, the final piece of the puzzle arrived. It came to a P.O. box I had maintained for legal forwarding, a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold calligraphy. I opened it, my fingers tracing the raised lettering. "Mr. Grayson Hale and Ms. Miranda Cole request the honor of your presence." They had sent it. Of course they had. It was the ultimate power move, a final twist of the knife to show me that I was so insignificant, so utterly defeated that they could invite me to celebrate my own replacement. They expected me to burn it, or to cry over it. They expected silence. I stared at the date, November 12th. The venue, the Plaza Hotel. The guest list included the city's financial elite, the very people whose money Verena had been stealing for years. I laid the invitation on the wooden table next to the stack of printed bank statements. A slow, terrifying smile spread across my face. They had just handed me the detonator. "Are you going?" Elias asked, watching me carefully. "Going," I laughed, a sound that lacked any humor. "Elias, I am going to be the main event." I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not called in a year. "I need a dress," I said when the line connected, something that looks like mourning, but feels like revenge. They say that pride comes before a fall, but in the case of the Hale family, it was not just pride. It was a delusion of godhood. Through the lens of my surveillance and the gossip columns I had monitored for months, I had a perfect picture of the enemy camp before the slaughter. Miranda Cole was living in a fantasy she had constructed over the ruins of my life. To her, this wedding was not just a union, it was a coronation. She believed I had vanished into the ether, a broken woman too ashamed to show her face in the city that had rejected her. She posted incessantly on social media, calling their relationship a destined love that had overcome tragic obstacles. I was the obstacle. She had rewritten history to make herself the heroine who saved Grayson from a loveless, barren marriage. I watched a video she posted the morning of the ceremony. She was holding up her hand, flaunting a ring that made my stomach clench. It was a deep, velvet blue sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Verena gave it to me. Miranda squealed to her bridesmaids in the clip, her voice high and breathless. She said it belongs to a woman who truly understands the value of family. Can you believe it? She said, I am the daughter she always wanted. I closed my eyes for a second. That ring was the Hale family heirloom. Verena had shown it to me once, 5 years ago, and told me that it would be mine when I proved myself worthy. I never got it. Now, it sat on the finger of the woman who had helped destroy me. Grayson, however, was the weak link. My data showed that he had been visiting a therapist under a pseudonym, paying in cash. He was not sleeping. In the candid photos taken by the paparazzi outside his office, he looked gaunt, his eyes darting around as if he expected a ghost to jump out from the shadows. He felt the guilt, but he was too cowardly to act on it. Verena had her claws deep in his spine, keeping him upright. I had intercepted a voicemail he left for Miranda 2 nights before the wedding. His voice sounded thick, likely from Scotch. Babe. Are we sure about the guest list security he had asked? His voice cracking. I have this feeling. What if she tries to contact the press? What if she knows about the signings? He was terrified I would find out about the documents he had signed. He thought that was the only leverage I could possibly have. He had no idea I had the entire ledger. Verena, the architect of my misery, was the calmest of them all. To her, I was already dead. She had scrubbed my name from the company website, removed my photos from the family albums, and spread whispers through her social circle that I had suffered a mental breakdown and moved to a facility in Nevada. She told people I was unstable and not cut out for the pressure of high society. She believed she had won the war without firing a single shot. Grayson, darling, I imagined her saying, smoothing his lapel as she had done 1,000 times before. She is gone. She is a nobody. Today is about securing our future. Do not let a phantom ruin your moment. Their arrogance was absolute. They truly believed that money was a shield that could deflect any arrow. They sat in their suite, drinking vintage champagne that cost $3,000 a bottle, toasting to a future built on fraud. They thought the silence from my end was the silence of defeat. They did not understand that the eye of the storm is always silent before the winds tear the house apart. I checked my reflection in the mirror of the hotel lobby restroom one last time. I applied a coat of dark red lipstick, sharp as a blade. They were expecting a victim. They were about to meet the prosecutor. The heavy oak doors to the ballroom swung open with a groan that seemed to cut through the string quartet's rendition of Vivaldi. I did not rush. I stepped onto the plush carpet with the deliberate cadence of a soldier marching onto a battlefield. The room, which had been buzzing with the hum of gossip and clinking crystal, fell into a silence so sudden and absolute that I could hear the intake of breath from the woman nearest to me. I wore a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk, tailored to fit like a second skin, sharp and elegant. It was a stark contrast to the pastel fairy tale Miranda had vomited all over the room. I kept my chin high, my eyes locked straight ahead, ignoring the ripple of shock that followed my wake. Is that Lucille? Someone whispered to my left. I thought she was in rehab, another voice murmured. At the head table, the color drained from Miranda's face so fast she looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of the chandeliers. She gripped Grayson's arm, her knuckles white, her perfect smile trembling into a grimace of pure panic. Grayson looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stood halfway up, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He knew. In his gut. The man who had slept beside me for 4 years knew I was not here to wish them well. Verena was the first to react. She rose from her seat like a cobra uncoiling, her face a mask of furious composure. She smoothed her skirt and marched toward me, intercepting me in the center of the dance floor before I could reach the happy couple. She smelled of expensive rose oil and old money. "Lucille," Verena hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear, but vibrating with venom. "You have some nerve showing your face here. You are not on the list. Turn around and walk out, or I will have security drag you out by your hair. Do not make a scene, you pathetic little girl." I stopped and looked down at her. For years, this woman had made me feel small. She had criticized my laugh, my clothes, and my family. Now, looking at her, all I saw was a desperate old woman standing on a foundation of sand. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach my eyes. "I would not do that if I were you. Verena," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Not when half the board of directors for the Hale Group is watching. Imagine the headlines if you assault the former Mrs. Hale at your son's wedding. It might complicate things." Verena flinched. She saw something in my eyes she had never seen before, a complete lack of fear. She hesitated, and in that split second of hesitation, I walked past her. I walked straight to the microphone stand that had been set up for the toasts. The room was frozen. 300 guests watched me with a mixture of horror and thrill. They were expecting a scorned woman's rant. They were expecting me to cry about the affair, to scream about Miranda stealing my husband. They wanted a soap opera. I tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the cavernous hall like a gunshot. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was clear, devoid of tears. "I apologize for the interruption. I know I am not on the program, but I felt compelled to deliver a wedding gift. You see, silence is a heavy burden to carry for a year. And tonight, I decided to put it down." Grayson finally found his voice. He scrambled out from behind the table, knocking over a glass of red wine that spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. "Lucille, stop!" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. Do not do this. We can talk outside." "Sit down, Grayson," I commanded, not even looking at him. The authority in my voice stunned him into silence. He froze, looking at Verena for help, but Verena was staring at the envelope in my hand. I lifted the thick cream envelope for the room to see. It looked innocent enough, matching the wedding stationery, but the weight of it felt like lead. "Most of you think I am here because of a broken heart," I continued, scanning the room, making eye contact with the senator in the front row and the bank CEO in the back. But hearts heal. What I have here is something that does not heal so easily. I have here the truth about how this wedding and the Hale lifestyle was actually funded. The air in the room shifted instantly. The curiosity turned to confusion. And then, as I tore the seal of the envelope with a loud rip, to dread. This was not about love anymore. This was about money. And in this room, money was the only god they worshipped. I pulled out the first document, the paper crisp and damning under the ballroom lights. "Let us begin," I said softly. "As of 9 o'clock this morning," I began, my voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. The Securities and Exchange Commission has opened a formal inquiry into the Hale Family Foundation and its subsidiary holdings for gross embezzlement and securities fraud. The reaction was visceral. It was not the gasp of scandalized socialites. It was the terrifying murmur of people realizing their wallets were in danger. I saw the bank CEO in the back row reach for his phone, his face pale. "You are lying," Verena shrieked, her composure shattering like dropped glass. She took a step toward me, her hands shaking. This is slander. I will sue you for everything you have. I do not think you have the liquidity for a lawsuit." "Verena," I replied calmly, pulling a spreadsheet from the envelope. "Not when you have siphoned $12 million from your own investors to cover the losses of your shell company in the Caymans. Is that not right? You moved the funds on October 3rd, claiming it was for infrastructure development. But according to these bank routing numbers, the money went straight into a private account under your name. I held the paper up. It was a simple bar graph, the kind I made every day at work, but this one charted the systematic looting of a legacy. "And you, Grayson," I said, turning my gaze to my ex-husband. He was gripping the edge of the table, sweating through his custom tuxedo. "You told everyone you were the CEO, the leader. But looking at these documents, you were just the fall guy. Your signature is on every single illegal wire transfer. You signed off on the fraud 3 separate times, once on July 4th, once on August 10th, and finally, just last week to pay for this wedding." A heavy silence fell over the room. The guests were no longer looking at the couple with adoration. They were looking at them like they were contagious diseases. I did what my mother told me to do," Grayson stammered, his voice barely audible over the microphone feed. "I did not know. I thought it was legal restructuring. Ignorance is not a defense in federal court, Grayson," I said coldly. Miranda stood frozen, her bouquet of white orchids trembling in her hands. She looked from Verena to Grayson, the realization dawning on her face. She was not marrying into a dynasty. She was marrying into an indictment. She had plotted for years to steal a life that was currently valued at negative $40 million. "Lucille," Miranda whispered, her voice wavering. "Please. This is my wedding. You cannot do this." "Oh, I am not finished with you, Miranda," I said, pulling out the final sheet of paper. "You see, insider trading requires 2 people, one to leak the information and one to act on it. 3 days before the Hale Group announced their merger last spring, you bought $50,000 worth of stock. You sold it 2 days later for a profit of $200,000. You used information Grayson gave you in bed to rob the market." The room erupted. It was chaos. The senator in the front row stood up and began shouting at his aide to get the car. The investors were surrounding Verena, demanding answers, their voices rising in a cacophony of anger. "Where is my money?" Verena, a man in a gray suit, shouted, pointing a finger in her face. "You told me the fund was secure. I put $2 million in there." "It is a misunderstanding," Verena cried out, backing away, her eyes darting around for an exit that was blocked by angry creditors. "Please, let us discuss this in private." "There is no privacy when you steal from the public," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I stood there, the only calm point in a room that had descended into madness. I watched Grayson collapse into his chair, burying his face in his hands. I watched Miranda drop her bouquet, the white flowers scattering on the floor like debris. They were not looking at each other. They were not holding hands. The love story they had sold to the world had dissolved the moment the check bounced. I folded the papers neatly and placed them back on the stand. I felt light, lighter than I had felt in years. I had not just exposed an affair. I had dismantled an institution. To me, it was just data. It was just a correction of the market. But to them, it was the end of the world. The masquerade was over. The guests, who moments ago had been sipping champagne and whispering polite nothings, were now circling us like sharks sensing blood in the water. The veneer of high society had cracked, revealing the ugly, jagged edges of desperation underneath. Verena stood amidst the ruins of her reputation. For the first time since I met her, she looked old. The Botox and the facelifts could not hide the sag of defeat in her jaw. She looked at me not with hatred, but with a dawning realization that terrified her more than any lawsuit. She realized that the mouse she had kicked out of her house had been quietly memorizing the layout of the trap. "You," Verena breathed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "You calculated this. You waited for this exact moment. You are not a victim. You are a monster. I learned from the best." "Verena," I replied, my voice steady. "I simply applied your business model to your personal life. Maximum impact, minimum mercy. Miranda, seeing her dream crumbling into a nightmare of litigation and poverty, turned on the only person she could hurt." She grabbed Grayson by the lapels of his tuxedo, her nails digging into the fabric. "You said she was handled." Miranda shrieked, her face twisted and ugly, the facade of the blushing bride completely gone. "You said she was pathetic. You told me she was too weak to fight back. How could you let this happen? You are useless. You are a weak, spineless coward." Grayson stumbled back, pushing her hands away. He looked wildly around the room, his eyes landing on me. He ignored his mother. He ignored his screaming fiancée. He walked toward me, his hands outstretched, his eyes wet with tears that looked genuine for the first time in years. "Lucille, please," he begged, falling to his knees in front of me, right there on the polished dance floor. Tell them I had no choice. My mother. She made me sign those papers. She said it was the only way to save the company. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I was trapped." The room went silent again, watching the heir to the Hale empire groveling at the feet of the woman he had discarded. I looked down at him. I remembered how I used to soothe him when he was stressed. I remembered how I used to believe that he was a good man in a bad situation, but the data was clear. "You always had a choice." "Grayson," I said, my voice cold enough to freeze the air between us. "You could have chosen honesty. You could have chosen to leave. Instead, you chose the money. You chose the penthouse and the cars and the woman who looked good in photos. You did not sign those papers because you were forced. You signed them because you are greedy." Verena stepped forward, her face purple with rage. She could not stand seeing her son on his knees, and she certainly could not stand me holding the gavel. "You are nothing," Verena spat, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are a mediocre little girl from a mediocre family. You think ruining a wedding makes you one of us? You will never be one of us. You are a clerical error that I should have erased years ago. I do not want to be one of you." "Verena," I retorted, meeting her gaze without blinking. "And considering the federal marshals are currently freezing your assets, I would say that by tomorrow morning. You will not be one of you anymore either. You are bankrupt. The company is gone. The house is gone. You are just an old woman with a lot of debt and a criminal record." Miranda tried to pivot, sensing that the ship was sinking and trying to find a lifeboat. She turned to the crowd, smoothing her dress, putting on a mask of tearful innocence. I didn't know she sobbed, looking at the wives of the investors. I am a victim here too. Grayson lied to me. He used me. I had no idea about the money. A woman in the second row, the wife of the bank CEO, stepped forward. "We saw the trades. Miranda," she said, her voice dripping with disgust. "We saw the dates. You sold the stock 3 days before the crash. You are not a victim. You are just a thief in a white dress." The judgment was swift and absolute. Miranda recoiled as if slapped. Grayson looked up at me, his hand reaching for the hem of my dress. "Lucille, listen to me. I made a mistake. With her. With everything. I miss you. I never stopped loving you. Miranda. She was easy. She did what my mother wanted. But you were real. We can fix this. Please. Help me fix this. I looked at the man on the floor. I searched my heart for a flicker of pain, a spark of anger, or even a lingering ember of love. I searched for the husband I had mourned for a year, but there was nothing. It was like looking at a stranger, or a blurry photograph of someone I used to know. The man I loved had died the day he chose to betray me. I do not know you, I said softly, stepping back so his hand fell to the floor. The man I loved would never have let this happen. You are just a defendant now, Grayson, and I am the witness for the prosecution. The three of them stood there, the matriarch, the mistress, and the golden boy stripped of their armor, exposed for exactly what they were. They had thought they were gods playing with mortals. They forgot that even gods can fall when the temple collapses. The timing was impeccable, almost as if the universe itself had aligned to deliver the final blow. Just as the echo of my accusations faded into the stunned silence of the ballroom, the heavy double doors swung open again. This time, it was not a waiter, and it was certainly not a guest. 4 men and 2 women in sharp charcoal gray suits walked in, their badges glinting under the chandeliers. They moved with the terrifying efficiency of government agents who had already built their case. The lead agent, a tall man with a face like carved stone, walked straight to the head table. He did not look at the guests. He did not look at the flowers. He looked only at the woman who had thought she was untouchable. "Verena Hale," the agent said, his voice carrying over the low hum of panic that had started to rise in the room. "I am Special Agent Miller from the Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Division. We have a warrant to seize all electronic devices and physical records associated with the Hale Family Foundation and the Hale Group. We also have a warrant for your immediate questioning regarding wire fraud and embezzlement." Verena stood trembling, clutching the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. She looked around for an ally, for a lawyer, for anyone who could stop this. But the room was full of people who were already mentally distancing themselves from her. "This is a wedding," Verena screeched, her voice cracking into a desperate, ugly sound. "You have no right. Do you know who I am? I will have your badge for this. I demand to speak to my attorney." "You can call him from our office, ma'am," Agent Miller replied, his tone bored. "Please step away from the table. Do not touch your phone." To her left, another agent approached Miranda. She was still crying, but her tears stopped abruptly when the woman handed her a folded document. "Miss Cole," the agent said sharply, "this is a notice of asset forfeiture, due to the evidence of insider trading linked to your personal accounts. All liquid assets, including the investment portfolio you opened 3 days ago, have been frozen effective immediately. You are also named as a person of interest in the conspiracy investigation." Miranda stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, the reality hit her. The millions she thought she had secured were gone. The lifestyle she had sold her soul for had evaporated before the cake was even cut. "No, no." Miranda screamed, a raw, guttural sound that made the guests flinch. "You cannot do this! That is my money! I earned it, Grayson! Grayson, tell them it was a gift!" Grayson could not tell anyone anything. 2 agents were already flanking him on the small stage. They did not handcuff him, but the way they stood made it clear he was in custody in all but name. "Mr. Hale," one of them said, loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, "we have a summons for you. The Securities and Exchange Commission has flagged your signature on 42 separate illegal transactions. You need to come with us now." Grayson looked at me one last time. His face was a mask of total defeat. He looked like a child who had realized too late that the monsters were real. He slumped his shoulders and let them lead him away, walking past the woman he was supposed to marry without even a glance. The officiant, a bewildered judge who had probably expected a hefty donation for his services, tapped the microphone nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this ceremony is canceled. Please clear the room." Pandemonium broke out. The carefully curated seating chart dissolved into a stampede. People were rushing for the exits, tapping frantically on their phones to sell their Hale Group stock before the market opened the next morning. I turned and walked toward the main doors. The crowd parted for me as if I were royalty. Men who ran hedge funds and women who ruled the social calendar stepped back, pressing themselves against the walls to let me pass. They looked at me with a mixture of terror and awe. They whispered as I passed, wondering how the quiet, overlooked wife had managed to bring down a dynasty in under 20 minutes. They wondered where I had found the courage. They wondered what else I knew. I walked out of the ballroom and into the cool air of the hotel lobby. Through the glass revolving doors, I could see the chaos outside. The media had arrived. Dozens of cameras were flashing, lighting up the night like a lightning storm. They had been tipped off about the raid, likely by the same source that had sent the files to the government. I pushed through the doors and stepped onto the sidewalk. The flashbulbs blinded me for a second, and a wall of noise hit me. Reporters were shouting questions, their microphones thrust toward my face. "Ms. Hartman, is it true you tipped off the feds? Lucille, did you know about the fraud all along? How long have you been planning this?" I stopped on the bottom step. I looked at the sea of hungry faces, then back at the hotel where the Hale legacy was currently being dismantled by federal agents. I felt the cool night breeze on my face, cleansing the scent of Verena's perfume from my memory. I looked directly into the nearest camera, my expression calm, unreadable, and dangerous. "I have been silent long enough," I said softly. Then I turned and walked toward the waiting black car, leaving the wreckage behind me. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, muffling the chaotic symphony of shouting reporters and frantic guests. For a moment, the world was just the rhythm of my own heels clicking against the pavement and the cool night air filling my lungs. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply. It smelled like rain and gasoline. But to me, it smelled like freedom. The air was no longer thick with Verena's judgment or Grayson's lies. It was clean. A silver sedan pulled up to the curb, cutting through the wall of paparazzi. The window rolled down to reveal Elias, his face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He did not ask how it went. He just unlocked the door. "Get in," he said, a small knowing smile playing on his lips. "I think you have caused enough trouble for one night." I slid into the passenger seat and watched the hotel fade into the rearview mirror. The flashing lights of the police cars arriving at the scene looked like fireworks celebrating my independence. My phone buzzed in my lap. It was a news alert Department of Justice launches full audit of Hale Group finances. By the next morning, the empire was already being carved up by creditors. The news was everywhere. Verena, Miranda, and Grayson had their personal assets frozen by a federal judge at 8 a.m. Miranda was filmed leaving her apartment in oversized sunglasses, carrying a single suitcase, dodging questions about her insider trading. Grayson was nowhere to be seen, likely hiding in a lawyer's office, realizing that his mother could no longer buy his way out of consequences. They were not just broke, they were pariahs. The social circle that had once worshipped them was now competing to see who could denounce them the loudest. When I walked back into the Westfield Meridian Group on Monday, the atmosphere had shifted. I was no longer just the quiet analyst in the corner office. I was the woman who had single-handedly decapitated a corrupt financial giant. Senior partners stopped by my desk to nod respectfully. Clients specifically requested my oversight on their accounts, trusting the eyes that had spotted a 10-year fraud scheme that everyone else had missed. I had become a symbol of something dangerous and necessary competence with a backbone. I sat at my desk and opened a new spreadsheet. I expected to feel a lingering anger, or perhaps a hollow sadness for the marriage I had lost, but there was nothing. The space where the pain used to be was now filled with a profound, quiet relief. I had surgically removed the tumor that was the Hale family from my life, and the recovery was instant. I realized then that my year of silence had not been an act of submission. It was the most aggressive move I could have made. While they were shouting and posturing, I was listening. While they were spending, I was calculating. They thought silence was empty, but I proved that silence is where the strategy is born. I packed up my laptop at 5 in the afternoon. I had a dinner reservation with friends, real friends, not social climbers in a life to live that was entirely my own. I walked out of the building and into the bustling city street, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. I did not look back at the skyline where the Hale building stood dark and empty. I just adjusted my bag on my shoulder and walked forward, stepping into a future that finally belonged to me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.